Sage Wanderer here, coming at you from my shotgun shack in the Texas Outback. I'm bringing you this video today because tomorrow is Easter Sunday, and this day marks a constitutional crisis for the citizens of the United States of America. That there are governors, local sheriffs, police departments, and city mayors across the country who are shuttering churches and denying the free exercise of religion in violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States on this Easter Sunday. And it is unprecedented. Never in the history of America have churches been shut down by anyone in the government. This is a clear violation of the First Amendment. If you watch this channel, you know I believe the virus is real. I believe that people are dying from this, and it is an emergency. Last year, many of you know, I attended Easter Sunday services. This year, I was not going to attend, am not going to attend, because I personally feel like it's a health threat. However, the governments are allowed, in my opinion, to give guidance, to make suggestions, but the mandatory authoritarian thuggery that we're seeing now of the shutting down of places of worship is not just unconstitutional, it's criminal. And a immediate government intervention on a federal level needs to occur to stop this tyranny in its tracks, or quite frankly, violence is likely to break out. Many people like myself have made a vow to defend the Constitution against all threats, both foreign and domestic, and that includes governments who are bent on violating people's constitutional rights, even if it is under the guise of public health. That it's criminal, and we have to do whatever we need to do to stop this. So I'm calling on the President of the United States to put a stop across the board to these government interventions and these government abrasions of our First Amendment rights. Now, I personally wouldn't go to church on Sunday because there's a pandemic out there and it's real and people are getting sick and dying from it. However, the government does not have the right to make that decision on behalf of a pastor and his congregation. The separation of church and state is very clear. This country was founded, in many cases, by refugees from religious persecution from around the world. And Pennsylvania, in particular, was founded by Quakers who were escaping persecution in other countries. And so the right of the people to freely exercise religion is a fundamental constitutional right, and there is no exception to that rule. The Constitution doesn't say you have rights except under these circumstances. The Constitution is clear. Your right is God-given and therefore should not be infringed upon. And the governments do not have the right to do what they're doing. The scum of the earth, Mayor de Blasio of New York City, has actually threatened to permanently close down churches who violate his order and have church anyway. This is a criminal act. He should be arrested right now. If you're a law enforcement officer on the state level, or if you're a judge or a politician in the state of New York, you should call for the arrest of Mayor de Blasio immediately for the violation of constitutional rights of the people of New York. Last week in Florida, Pastor Rodney Howard Brown was arrested in Hillsborough County, Florida, by a tyrannical state attorney and his thug of a sheriff who's working for him. And I want to talk in detail about this case in particular, because the people of Florida's rights are being infringed upon, and this local politician, this local attorney and sheriff, the sheriff, by the way, was appointed and not elected, and he's up for re-election. And let's talk about the sheriff first, and then the state attorney that gave the order. So the sheriff that led this unconstitutional arrest, his name is Chad Cronister, and he was appointed and not elected. Now, I've done a lot of research on this guy, and I personally believe that he is corrupt. He is definitely anti-Second Amendment. His gun buyback program, you can't buy back something you never owned, but his gun buyback program has seized more guns in Florida than any other program in the country. Chad is not a very good parent because his son is a criminal. And you say you can't hold a parent accountable for the acts of their grown children, but I would also say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Chad Cronister's son, George, is a wannabe rapper, and he's embraced the thug life. And in an altercation, he criminally stabbed in the face and chest another young man, collapsing his lung and scarring his face permanently. George was found guilty of this crime and sentenced to 22 months in prison, and he is currently serving that prison term now, as I understand it. So Chad's not a very good parent, and he's also probably, well, clearly not a very good sheriff either, because he's violated his oath of office when he unconstitutionally arrested a pastor rather, for exercising his constitutionally guaranteed right of freedom of religion. Now, I wouldn't have church, but it's not my decision. That's his decision, and it is certainly not the decision of a state attorney or a local sheriff. So I find it interesting that this wannabe rapper son, George Cronister, the son of the sheriff, if he was a regular person, he would have gotten a 15-year sentence for this criminal assault. But because he's the son of a sheriff, they gave him a 22-month sentence instead. So let's talk about Chad Cronister's deputies. So if you can't judge a sheriff by his son, you certainly should be able to judge a sheriff by his deputies. Chad's deputies, one of them, was traveling 66 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone when he hit and killed a 13-year-old boy. The sheriff called it an accident, and he defended his deputy publicly. And as far as I know, that deputy was never held accountable for hitting and killing this 13-year-old boy, even though this was the deputy's fourth crash on the job. I've got more stories like that, but let's move on ahead. So let's talk about the Hillsborough County state attorney, the prosecutor, who put out this order to have this pastor arrested. So he's also an authoritative thug, and he is currently involved in a ego-driven battle with the governor, Ron DeSantis of Florida. So Governor DeSantis, he issued a stay-at-home order. He did not specify churches in that order one way or the other. And this Andrew Warren, the state attorney, the prosecutor in question of Hillsborough County, he took it upon himself to shut churches down by his own authority, forcing Governor DeSantis to issue a secondary order exempting churches from this crackdown and this public health emergency. And rightfully so. Constitutional rights are not conditional. They are, in fact, unconditional. Our rights are not issued by the state, and they can't be taken away by the state, because our rights are issued by God, and only God can take away my rights. And woe unto you who try to take away my rights individually. I won't stand for it. Now, we've talked about this. I am the guy that wrote the song, "You can have my guns out of your over your dead body." So, but when Governor DeSantis defended pastors and clarified his order, this Andrew Warren called him weak and spineless and an April Fool's joke. So he also said on CNN that he intends to shut down churches whether it's ordered by the governor or not. So he's in defiance of the governor of Florida, and he should definitely be held accountable. I believe both of these men, both the sheriff and the prosecutor there in the county, are up for re-election this year. So we should actively pursue the dethroning of these thugs and the removal of office from them, for them. And let's name the guy. I do know the guy that is running against the sheriff. And this officer of the sheriff's department there has openly condemned the sheriff's stance on closing churches and vows to uphold the constitutional rights of the people of Hillsborough County if he is elected sheriff. And his name is Ron McMullen. So Ron McMullen is running against Chad Cronister for sheriff of Hillsborough County. So we've got this kind of battle going on around the country right now, across the country. Um, in near Baton Rouge, Louisiana, there's an embattled pastor there that is being threatened. Well, he's been arrested and he's being threatened with arrest again, but he's determined to have church on Easter Sunday. And, you know, these people aren't just going about church as usual. The people that are defying the orders and having church anyway are still practicing social distancing. They're checking people's temperatures as they enter the building, and they're asking them questions about their health before they're permitted to come in. They're being seated the 6 feet apart as mandatorily required. They're being told not to hug or shake hands as usual. And so there is an effort by these churches to protect the health of the people. But really, this isn't about the health of the people now, is it? This is about the violation of the constitutional rights of people to assemble under the First Amendment and exercise their freedom of religion. These authoritative thugs like the mayor de Blasio of New York would shut down every church anyway, just because he doesn't like churches. He would do that to all of them anyway. He would buckle everyone under his authority if he could get away with it. And if we sit idly by and let him, he is getting away with it. These public officials are getting away with it. The governor of Kansas is another tyrannical thug. Um, she issued an executive order prohibiting church services on Easter Sunday, and she was then challenged by the Congress of Kansas, and they said you can't do that, and they issued an order of their own upholding the Constitution and permitting churches to have church on Easter Sunday, and then she filed a lawsuit against them, challenging her own Congress over her authoritative grab for power to close down churches in her state. This person should be immediately removed from office. A federal judge needs to issue a stay and a cease and desist order against these law enforcement officers and these county and state officials that are violating the United States Constitution. And it needs to be done now under an emergency order. You know, there could be conflict on Easter Sunday. And if I was a pastor and had made the decision, there would be conflict. I would encourage conflict. I would ring my church with the cars of the parishioners and build a human shield and defy them to billy club us all and arrest us all. That I would engage in public condemnation and disorder and public defiance of the unconstitutional grab for power that's occurring right now in our country. But I'm just a guy in a shotgun shack in the Texas Outback. I'm no longer a pastor. But like I said, if I were a pastor, I'd probably voluntarily close down my church. But that's not my call unless I am the pastor. And it's the pastor's call and no one else's. No one's forcing the people to come. They're not being required to come or be excommunicated. They're being allowed to come if they wish. And the doors are open. They should be open. You know, when I was a child, every church door, when I was a little kid, this changed in my lifetime, but every church door was open all of the time. If you were walking by a church and you felt a prick in your heart by the Holy Spirit and you felt a need to pray, you could just pull on the door handle and open it up and walk right in and go down to the altar and pray. And you'd probably be heard by the pastor who was there, the staff, and somebody would come and pray with you. And only when thieves started targeting churches and stealing guitars and pianos, you know, my dad's church in Grapevine, Texas, was burglarized when I was a teenager. And they actually tried to push the grand piano out of the church. It just wouldn't fit through the door, and so they had to leave it there. But they stole our missions money, you know, the little church bank that people drop coins in. They stole the offering. They stole my dad's guitar and the drums and the bass guitar stored there in the church, and vandalized it. But before, people wouldn't do that, and churches were open all of the time. And now they've gone from being open all the time to not even being allowed to have church on the holiest day of the year. This is tyranny. This is ridiculous. This is unconstitutional, and it is criminal. And we need to hold these criminal thugs who are assailing our First Amendment accountable politically. I'm calling for the immediate removal from office of any elected official who violates the constitutional right of the people to assemble and exercise their freedom of religion. This is unprecedented and unconstitutional, to say the least, and something must be done. And if they want to continue in this thuggery, I suspect that things will heat up rather quickly, because I don't expect Christians to lay down and give up their right to assemble. Whether I agree or not with their decision, it is their decision and their decision only, and is between them and God, and the government has no place in it. So I think I've covered most of this. I will probably do a little more detailed research on this. I intend to publicly call out by name every police officer who engages in the shutdown of churches and the arrest of pastors during this pandemic. You will be held accountable by the people. I will make sure they know who you are. And if you are a YouTuber and a Christian, or just someone who appreciates the Constitution, I encourage you to do the very same thing. They need to be named. They need to have their picture shown. They need to, their bosses need to be assailed with phone calls. There needs to be recall, election recall, and impeachment petitions signed by church followers and pastors around the country to put an end to this tyranny. It's got to stop. This, to me, is actually more volatile than the Second Amendment. There's two things I would fight and die to protect. It's kind of my red line, my line in the sand. And that's the freedom of religion in this country and the right to keep and bear arms, both of which are under attack in these difficult times. And never in the history of the United States has the Constitution been tread upon in an emergency situation like it is now. And it must stop. God save the Constitution, and God save our republic.